UofL's Envirom Institute is looking at the environment's impact on health, and one of the researchers at the Envirom Institute is Rachel Keith, who is focusing on smoking and e-cigarettes, and she's worked on several studies, including smoking's impact on diabetes in black adults, the boon in e-cigarette usage by kids, and the topic we're going to talk about first: can quitting smoking really improve your long-term health, or is the damage already done? Rachel, good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
You've been a busy young lady, haven't you?
It's been a busy couple of years for our group. So
Which is good.
Yeah.
Which is good. The Envirom Institute, for those who don't know, it's a brand new institute at the University of Louisville, right?
It was founded last year. A lot of us, the researchers, have been around a while, but the actual institute was put together formally last year.
With a big grant from the Brown family, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk first. We got several things to talk about. So let's start first about this study on if you quit smoking, does it really help your health long term, or have you already smoked too long and you're stuck with the bad health effects of it?
All right.
Tell me about it.
So we focus on cardiometabolic disease. So that's things like heart attack, stroke, heart failure, diabetes, right? Things that affect your body that way. And it's a really complicated picture because for a lot of these things, it can be dose dependent, which means the intensity of how much you smoke in one day, so cigarettes per day, or it could be a burden, so how long you've smoked over a set number of years. So with the Jackson Heart study, we looked at heart failure in that particular realm, and found that it was dose dependent and burden dependent, meaning the more you smoke, the more likely you were to have these issues with heart failure. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to further that study and move on to another cohort. We looked at a multi-ethnic cohort. Jackson Heart study is an all-black cohort in Mississippi. And we went to a multi-ethnic cohort now to look at if there's any differences there. And we found that it wasn't so much dose and burden related anymore for heart failure. You were much more likely to have heart failure if you were a current smoker. So that meant anyone who smoked had a much higher chance of having heart failure.
No matter how old you are and how long you smoked.
Correct.
Okay.
And then if you quit, your chances of having heart failure decreased as well. So that meant your risk was almost the same as a non-user. And it didn't matter for how, we looked at, did it matter? Did you have to be quit 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, those sort of things. And that didn't have an effect on it in this particular population. So what that meant was if you quit smoking, there are, your chances of having heart failure decrease. And so you haven't done irreversible damage, right? It's never...
At least on your heart. This is just on heart stuff, not lung cancer, right. Those kinds of things. Okay.
So you haven't done irreversible damage there. We've also looked at diabetes, which I know you've seen the Jackson Heart study with that as well. And we looked in those same two cohorts, the Black Jackson Heart study and the multi-ethnic MESA study, and saw similar sort of things. If you look at low intensity or former smokers, your chance of having diabetes is the same as someone who didn't smoke. If you, in the particular in Jackson Heart study, in this all black cohort, if you are a high intensity smoker, meaning you had to smoke over 20 cigarettes a day.
How many packs is that?
That's
I don't even
one
know.
pack.
One pack.
So you have to be over a pack a day smoker.
Okay.
Then your chances of having diabetes went up. So for these particular diseases, your chances of having any sort of problems are much higher with current use. Right. So that's the good news, right?
Which makes sense.
Right. And
if you're still using cigarettes, you got a much better chance of having some heart disease or heart attack or something.
Correct.
Okay.
So I think the hard thing, though, is that we have to remember they aren't all dose dependent, right? So you cutting back to 5 cigarettes a day may not eliminate that risk.
So if you're a really light smoker, if you're still smoking, it may not help you.
For heart disease and diabetes and things like that.
Might help your lung cancer,
right?
Risk of lung cancer.
Correct. And so
we don't know that.
We don't know that. What we do know is that it's thought that lung cancer or cancers have more of a 1-to-1 correlation, meaning that for every 1 cigarette you smoke, your risk stepwise goes up. For heart disease, the first 1 to 3 cigarettes confer about 90% or more of your risk. So meaning cutting back isn't necessarily as great for you on that as it would be for cancer.
Gotcha. Again, we're talking with Rachel Keith, who's with the Envirome Institute at the University of Louisville, and she studies issues like e-cigarettes and smoking and impacts on cardiovascular health. And so we got two different things we're talking. Well, not they're sort of related, but I want to back up a little bit on the smoking and quitting. Mm-hmm. Was there any age? Was age a factor at all of if you hit age 60 and you've been smoking all your life and you decide to quit at age 60? Did that make any difference, or were you too far over the dam to go back if you're that old?
For the heart failure and the diabetes study that we did not see age as a factor. We didn't see, we look at gender, we look at age, we look at whether these different things play a role in your susceptibility to it. And we really didn't see much of anything there either. Now, again, that may not hold true for other disease states, right? But for these two particular ones, which is pretty helpful because a lot of people choose to quit smoking after their first heart attack, which puts you at great risk for heart failure. Mm-hmm. And those sort of things.
But age doesn't matter.
Age doesn't matter.
Okay, just on these two things.
Yeah.
And the amount of cigarettes you smoke throughout your life doesn't matter either, does it?
So
or does it?
It does.
Okay.
So it can. It can make it a little bit worse sometimes. And so
so there's not a definitive answer on that one. So if I'm a 1 pack a day smoker for 40 years and I quit cold turkey, mm-hmm. my risk of heart attack goes way down. But if I'm a 4 pack a day or 3 pack a day mm-hmm. smoker till age 40, it may or may not impact.
It will still go down. So it's more the degree.
Okay.
And it's more 1 pack and more we lump together and less than 1 pack. So if you're a 5 per day cigarette smoker and you quit, your risk may not have gone up as high for diabetes or those sort of things, but they did increase for heart attack
Gotcha.
So it kind of depends on what disease state you're talking about.
Gotcha. Okay. And then on the heart study for the mm-hmm. African Americans, mm-hmm. that was a deal that the African American, was it men and women both, had a greater risk of diabetes if they smoked.
Yes, if they were high intensity smokers. That's where we're talking about the 20 cigarettes per day or at least 10 pack years of cigarettes. So that's if you smoke less for longer, you hit that 10 pack years. If you smoke more for shorter, you still have that acute risk because you're smoking so much.
Talking with Rachel Keith from the Envirome Institute at the University of Louisville. Was there a difference between blacks and whites? Did you delineate between those two on who got diabetes and who didn't?
Correct. So in this particular study, it's an all-black cohort that we did that work out of. So there was no way to delineate. We didn't have another racial ethnic group in there. So in the other study we did with the MESA, which is the multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis, we didn't actually see a difference among races about whether or not you would get diabetes, but they also had a lot less of a tobacco burden, so we didn't see a spike in diabetes in that population at all.
Who's smoking e-cigarettes from your studies?
So from our studies, we've looked at an adult population in the BRFSS. It's a fancy national cohort that looks at behavioral risk factors. And so in adults, we find that there are about 10.8 million Americans using e-cigarettes.
And the percentage is what? What's that percentage?
I think it's a little over 4%. It's about close to 5%. It's 4.5%. The majority of those individuals are younger. So half that population at least is below 35. And then of that population, the highest age group using is 18 to 24-year-olds. We find in particular men use, the LGBT community uses, and people with chronic health diseases are using. Additionally, most of those people are dual users. So what does that mean? That means they use a traditional tobacco product in addition to the e-cigarette.
Right. And the number of youth that are using these, adolescents, teenagers,
Yes.
is going up.
So that is skyrocketing. It has probably at least over doubled in the past year, even from 2017 to 2018. The latest information out of the CDC shows that 20.8% of high schoolers, which is about 3.6 million high school users, are using it currently.
So about 21% of high school kids have used e-cigarettes.
Are currently using.
So they're not just standing and just try it. They're still using
They're
it.
still using.
Okay.
So you can almost double those numbers easily to about 40% if you want to know who's ever even tried it.
Okay.
So, and then the people who use it consistently, meaning 20 or more days out of the month, are 27.7% of those users are also using it almost every day, basically. And then in the middle school population, you're looking at about 4.5% or 4.9%, close to 5%, which is typical or is closer to the adult percentages, which is close to 600,000 middle schoolers are using those products. We tend to find that it's people whose other family members are using the product or their friends are using it. And people report that they tend to use them for kind of social reasons or those sort of factors in use.
Right. All right. Well, let's get to the bottom line question here that I think most people are asking, and there's great debate on this, even within researchers at the University of Louisville, on the health effects of e-cigarettes and on the Juul. What do you call them? Vaping, I guess it's vaping.
Juuling. People will actually say they're juuling.
Which is a name brand, though.
Correct.
Of these electronic cigarettes. So from what you've been able to put together in your research, what are you finding in terms of the health impacts? And is it a way for people to wean themselves off of cigarettes, which I think most would agree are worse in terms of health effects?
Correct. So I don't think anyone's going to say that e-cigarettes would ever be worse than, with what we know.
I think there's agreement
now,
on that, right?
With what we currently know, we don't think it'll be worse for someone who has been smoking. So let's be very clear. Nicotine is not benign, especially in adolescence. There's a lot of developmental components to that we don't deal with. So I want to be very clear with that. So I think the big debate is whether, as a harm reduction tool, it is effective enough that we want to promote it, seeing that in adolescents, it's their family members, their parents who are using this potentially that is leading to use. And when kids use it, their risk for becoming a user of traditional cigarettes goes up.
So it's a gateway.
So it has been shown to be a gateway.
Okay.
So we have also found in our research that there are levels of these chemicals. I think someone from our group may have actually come on and talked about it
Dan
recently.
Conklin, I think, came on and talked about it.
And there are levels of chemicals that we know are associated with heart disease that are increased above background levels and at times can be similar to that in cigarettes. It's not the whole chemical profile, but it is there. And I think the hard thing is, and this is the hard thing for research and why there can be so much debate, is each device is so different, right? And Juul came out and their nicotine levels are just off the charts.
Is there more nicotine in Juul than there is in a traditional cigarette?
If you look, that's hard to compare one to one because the nicotine, it's a nicotine salt in the Juul. So nicotine is changed in each different type of tobacco product, so it absorbs differently. So in a cigar, its pH is different, so it'll absorb through your mouth instead of having to be inhaled and stuff like that, right? So this salt is very different than the other products.
Well, I interrupted your train of thought. Sorry.
So no, you're fine. So, but I think what we're concerned about is that yes, it may be a harm reduction tool, but 15% of those high schoolers we talked about and those young adults we talked about are e-cigarette only users. So they are people who are not trying to transition from cigarettes and using this as a cessation device. And when you speak to the e-cigarette only population, and even people who have quit cigarettes and have gone exclusively to e-cigarettes, they have no intent of stopping those. So for the person who's quit cigarettes, they have likely done some beneficial risk management, especially in the world of cancer for themselves. But for that person who may not have ever picked up tobacco, what is it doing to them, right? And what can we expect long term?
And that's what we don't know.
And
right?
so we're getting a little bit of information on that. More and more studies are coming out that it can affect your blood vessels in similar ways. We look at something called flow mediated dilation to look at how healthy your blood vessels are. And there's some work suggesting that it definitely impacts that. There's some work suggesting some of the inflammatory markers go up some. What we don't know is long term yet.
Right.
And
so the e-cigarettes are not good for you. We know that. They have some health effects.
Correct.
We don't know how bad long term yet. We're working on that. It potentially could help some folks get off tobacco products, traditional cigarettes, but on the flip side, we've got folks starting these with no desire, no intention of ever smoking cigarettes. So we got more youth actually starting with a bad product.
Right. So the interesting thing is quit rates have doubled on those. It's up to about 8%. And when they first came out, it was around 4%. So it's not a horrible quit rate with e-cigarettes, but the most efficacious programs and medications, the quit rates are much higher than that. Yeah. So that's kind of the catch-22, right?
There's a better way to quit.
Right now, I think a lot of people still feel that way.
Okay. Before you leave here, Rachel Keith, I got to ask you about the project you're doing with the Envirom Institute in South Louisville. Tell us about that real quickly.
So that is Green Heart Louisville project. There's a health study going on right now called HEAL. We are inviting participants who are between the age of 30 and 60 to come in. If you live in the Beachmont, Wyandotte, Oakdale, Jacobs, that kind of area, and have a health evaluation. We'll do it before and after, planting and changing the greenness in the area. So we're looking to add trees and shrubs and other sorts of plants in the next year or so, and then we'll bring people back. And we want to know how that affects the community, the air quality, and your health in the area.
And you're still asking the neighbors in those areas to sign up and agree to have your blood drawn and take blood tests to see what your current health markers are, and then compare them to 4 or 5 years from now, right?
Yes, we are looking for anyone interested in that, and we'll have new opportunities all the time, different types of studies. So if you don't want to give blood, there'll be other ways for you to get involved in the project.
Okay. Again, that's Rachel Keith. She's with the Envirom, Envirome, Envirom Institute at the University of Louisville.